there were cases where I had awful experiences of being put on the spot, wanting to express myself to people and just having no idea where to even start. Not having skills, not having confidence or any kind of strategy, and just failing miserably.
Nick Field is an investment manager from Sydney, Australia. For a long time, communication was one of his biggest challenges. But now he helps people to grow and communicate with confidence.
Working on your communication skills is not just good for your relationships with other people, it's also good for your relationship with yourself. It can help you kind of round out your own identity and be a real and well-established person.
So what did you learn to stand in front of a group and to address the whole group without that feeling of anxiety and all the other negative feelings that come with that?
So what I did was...
Well, Nick, welcome. I think we met around 9 months ago and we spoke about doing this podcast for a couple of months now. So I'm very glad that we finally were able to set this up.
Me too.
Why don't you introduce yourself first? And after that, we can delve straight into the weeds of things like public speaking and things like communication.
Sure, glad to. Thanks, Jeffrey. I'm Nick Field. I'm a investment manager and I live in Sydney, Australia. And Jeffrey was interested to talk to me about a range of things, and I steered him towards public speaking, which is a passion of mine. It's something that does influence my work, but also my life outside of work. And so it's also adjacent to the forum and the social circles in which I actually met Jeffrey. So it seems sort of relevant on many fronts, but it's something I think is very important that people should work on, being able to express themselves more clearly. So that's what I would like to focus on today. We'll see how the conversation goes, though. You never know where it's going to drift.
And okay, so let's start with the absolute basics. Let's get some fundamentals in.
Sure.
So when you talk about public speaking, to you, what is public speaking and where does your love for public speaking come from?
What is it to me? I think really it's being able to express yourself clearly and confidently in front of a range of different crowds, people you know, people you don't know, large groups of people, small groups of people. And that is something that I think is very hard for many people, including me. So where did my love of this come from? I'm not sure love is the right word. I think it's better to say, how did I come to appreciate how important this is? And that is really from the fact that I struggled with it for a long time. And this is not just talking about Nick having a bit of a challenge speaking in front of a very large crowd of strangers. This is about Nick being quite awkward in his communication in general, even with people he knows. And so it's more a general theme of being able to articulate my thoughts more clearly. That's something I think is really important for me. And I think it's important for many people, whether they can do it or they can't. It's important to try and develop those skills just to, it affects so many things. I think, we can talk through in more detail. I think there's so many aspects of life which can be improved and enhanced if you can communicate clearly and confidently.
I'm very curious about your background in this specific case, because I think, and it sounds like we are sharing quite some similarities when it comes to speaking in front of crowds and why we realize that is important. So I'm really curious to find out where you come from with this. So you mentioned that it's not necessarily a love, but you realize that the need to develop your communication skills and to develop your public speaking skills, you realize that because it was important to articulate your thoughts clearly and throw it out there in the world, just to make sure that, I guess you can collaborate good with other people, you can communicate good with other people, those kind of things. So what was the challenge that you were facing when you were younger? Are we talking about your childhood here? Is this like also your adulthood? So can you give me the timeline where that struggle came from?
Right.
And what do you think was the source of that? Was it a piece of your personality? Was it an experience? Was it anything else? Where did it come from?
Sure. Well, lots of things feed into this. It goes back a long way. I can say, starting from just my nature, I'm quite a introverted personality, and some people who know me now might doubt that, but really, my natural personality is quite shy, introverted, and, well, somewhat socially awkward. So it was always a challenge to be able to just interact comfortably with people.
Hmm.
And the communication piece, just being able to express my thoughts, there have been some significant headwinds for a long time. So I can go back to like my childhood when I was in primary school even. There were cases where I had really awful experiences of being put on the spot, wanting to express myself to people and just having no idea where to even start. Not knowing, not having skills, not having confidence or any kind of strategy, and just failing miserably.
Hmm.
And that can become a bit of a downward spiral. I think this does actually happen to a lot of people. If they have one or two early experiences of struggling with communication, then they get into a kind of mindset that, oh, I am bad at this. I am hopeless. This is so hard. This is so painful and traumatic. So they don't practice and they get even more anxious.
Hmm.
And of course, the experiences just get worse and worse. So I was in a little bit of that spiral at first, but managed to turn that around. And then through teens, there were a few opportunities, a few moments where I sort of improved or saw the light and had steps up. But it really wasn't until late 20s, early 30s that I really started to get the hang of, at least have a sense of what I should be aiming at. I mean, at that point, it was more just coming to realize that, yeah, there was potential to be better, that I wasn't a complete lost cause. So that was where the improvement began, which is pretty late, I think, for most people.
What made you realize that? Why that switch? What triggered it?
Let me see. There was a lot of just reflection on where I was in life. So this is like socially, career-wise, romantic relationships, a whole lot of things where I could look and just think, okay, something's not quite right here. A few things are holding me back. So this was not the only piece of that puzzle, but it was a major one. It was something that was a challenge in my life. And I'm the sort of person who doesn't like to give up in a challenging scenario. I do always like to keep trying and break through these challenges. But sometimes you're in a situation where I just can't work out how to break through. So I'll keep trying,
Hmm.
but rather than just keep, bashing my head against a brick wall, I need to actually find a more strategic way to get through. And finally I did. I had a few breakthroughs, but until that point, there was some very painful experiences.
Yeah, it can be absolutely brutal. And especially like what you mentioned before in your childhood when you're being put on the spot. And I can imagine a couple of scenarios. I might fill it in for you. So feel free to give me some of your own as well.
I will. I've got a few stories for you.
Yeah, yeah, I bet you do. Things like being forced to go in front of the class, right? To read a scripture or something like that, or to present about a specific subject that you don't know that much about, just so to get graded and just to pass the specific class or something like that. But also, when all of a sudden, in my personal example, there will be that you're being pointed out in specific group settings, for example, as someone that all of a sudden needs to lead the group, or you become the, I don't know, the leader of a sports team or something like
Yeah.
that. Just arbitrarily, the fingers just being pointed to you, like, hey, Nick, you're gonna lead us right now. You do your thing, have fun, go at it. If that stuff comes all of a sudden and you're not good at communicating and you're pretty introverted by yourself, because I have also an introverted personality, naturally, let's say. that causes quite a stumble to come over, and it's quite hard to then get into that flow of collaboration with everybody, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned you had a couple of examples for yourself. So can you give me the examples and yeah, what happened? Can you describe those?
Okay. So here's an early experience, right? This is going back to primary school. So I was in, let me see, year 6. So about 10, I would have been.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there was a class debate that was put on, organized by my teacher. In fact, we had several rounds of these debates. So every week or two, a few people would be chosen. They'd be put in front of the class, and they'd have to argue a certain case. All pretty familiar kind of territory. Except I really didn't know how to handle that situation, so I was kind of a little bit anxious about this. And as I said, I don't like to be. I like to push through challenges. I like to, be able to solve these puzzles. And I had a very cunning plan to solve this puzzle and, a winning strategy for this debate. And my winning strategy was basically to cheat. So what I did was I just asked my older brother, who was 4 years older than me. He was a very experienced public speaker. He was on his high school debating
Mm.
team. And so I asked him basically, well, what should I say? And he just wrote a script for me. And I was really hopeless at public speaking in general, but I was good at rote learning. So I just memorized this script that he wrote for me. And when I got up to speak, I've got to say, I was amazing, right? Like when I finished speaking, there was just this hushed silence, and then everyone broke into applause. They were so impressed. It just wasn't me that was impressive, right? I was just, reciting a script. And so the outcome of that was that the teacher said, well done, Nick. That was amazing. That was so good that I'm going to put you in the grand final debate on the school open day in front of all of the kids in the school and their parents. So
Oh
that
boy.
wasn't part of the cunning plan, you see, and it was particularly unfortunate. Or maybe it was fortunate so early in my life that I had this lesson. My brother was away on camp that week of the grand final. Okay, so here's a lot of expectation building because people have heard me recite this amazing speech written by my brother, and this time around, I've just got nothing. So I got up to speak. Oh, this was the other thing. I wasn't quite comfortable admitting that I really had no idea what to do. Okay, so I basically kind of just procrastinated and stalled instead of doing some preparation on my own. So on the big day, I get up to say my piece, and I think I probably only said about 10 words in total. This is supposed to be like a 2 to 3 minute speech, but I just had absolutely nothing to offer. So, started ladies and gentlemen and finished with thank you very much. And in between, there really wasn't much at all.
Right.
And so, yes, it was bad, but it was also especially bad because there was so much expectation that people really expected so much from me. And so I don't think anyone else really understood what the problem was. But for me, you can imagine, terribly humiliating, right? And so but it was good to get that big slap in the face so early on because, well, obviously that's an important lesson, right? Don't cheat, do things for yourself, actually learn the skills rather than pretending to know something you don't or being capable where you're not. And so that was probably the low point, and it took a while to really pick up speed much later in my life, but at least from that low point there was improvement because it was a very important lesson.
How long did you need to recover from that? Because I can imagine that at 10 years old, it had quite the impact on you.
Yeah, it wasn't fun. But look, better that those things actually happen early. Okay, I wouldn't want to avoid all those kinds of traumas if there's an important lesson to be learned. So yeah, it was good for me.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then later in life, I had some positives. Like, so there were some cases where genuinely from my own ability, I would just take an opportunity to speak and just manage, a little bit of little bit of skill, little bit of luck, but things would sort of fall into place and I'd get positive feedback, say something for once, say it clearly and confidently, and people would respond really positively. And so then you can get into a positive upward spiral. And so that was, part of what encouraged me to actually put some dedicated effort into being a better speaker.
Yeah, and maybe this is also a very good gateway into the actual practicing of the skill of public speaking. So if somebody is terrified of public speaking, and I think this happens a lot, that people are very terrified with getting in front of a group, right, and putting their voice out there. Everybody's watching them. It's super scary. What are some steps that people can take to overcome that in your opinion? So what do you learn to stand in front of a group and to address the whole group without that feeling of anxiety and all the other negative feelings that come with that?
Let me just step back for a minute and just give a bit of context, because I could just give a few bullet points of, well, this is what you got to do, step 1, step 2. But instead, let me just sort of paint some context around this, which I think might be more helpful for other people, because it illustrates how I got better. I was involved in a group called Toastmasters for quite a long time. So Toastmasters is a global non-profit organization. There are chapters and clubs across the world which are part of Toastmasters. And basically, it's focused on helping people improve their public speaking skills. So across the world, there are groups of people all through the suburbs who meet weekly, fortnightly. They all get together in like a church hall or a community center, and they just practice public speaking. So I started doing that. So that was one of the things that really helped me, just to be in a situation where I'm surrounded by people who are also learning. So some of them are quite good speakers. Some of them are very poor. Many of them are still kind of anxious. They all want to improve. So that's another thing. You've got that ethos of everyone wanting to be better than they are. And because of that, everyone can encourage one another to actually improve, give some constructive criticism and say, well, you did this really well. This bit could be better if you did it this way. So you can sort of build each other up over time. So I wanted to give that context, because then you can see, well, that's an important step, right? You've got to practice, but practice with a sympathetic audience who will actually help you. They want you to succeed. They will help you to improve by giving you constructive feedback. And of course, there's a lot of people who they have to maybe present something at work. They have no idea how to prepare for that. So they end up just jumping in the deep end. They go and they present their thing. They don't know what they're doing. They get a really negative response from an audience because the audience is disinterested and looking at their phones or chattering and not listening, whatever. So it's much better to be in a situation like Toastmasters where you can actually have a lot of support from your initial audience. You can practice things in that kind of sympathetic setting before you then go to present to a colder audience. Let me just continue that piece, because I think one of the things I realized from my practice within Toastmasters, I sort of got to the point where I was comfortable enough, confident enough to be able to help other people learn. And then from then on, I ended up founding a few new Toastmasters clubs, especially in my workplaces. Various companies where I worked, I'd start up a little group of Toastmasters, people who were interested in presenting better. And I can tell you, in investments, in finance, there are a lot of people who are very smart with regard to sort of technical abstract concepts, but they struggle with communication. That's it's a stereotype, but it's a stereotype which has some truth. So there are a lot of people who can be much more effective overall if they could just communicate better. So there were quite a few people who were interested in being part of this group to improve. And then, even now, so there's a group. Just this morning, I was on. It was actually it's a virtual meeting, so a video call where there's people across the world who are interested in speaking more confidently, articulating their ideas. So I'm trying to help them express themselves better, but I'm still improving too. So it's always helpful for me, and I can learn a lot from seeing what other people are struggling with, seeing what helps them or what makes their speech more effective, and then I can learn from that too. So that there's a lot of feedback in these sort of experiences. When you're helping other people, you can learn a lot too from seeing what works.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And how do these classes look? So how do you structure them?
Well, that's open. The standard Toastmasters meeting is very structured. Okay, and I just want to be careful. Look, Toastmasters have done a lot for me, and I was very glad to be involved, but I don't want this to turn into a promotion just for that organization. But there are some things that they do that really work well. And one of those, let me see, there are a few pieces that I can just tease out, things which I still use. One is the idea that not all public speaking needs to be prepared beforehand. It doesn't need to be a speech script that you memorize and then recite. It's actually really helpful to be able to just think on the spot and maybe speak not so seriously. So, one of the ideas is you can answer impromptu questions. So, there's a system whereby in Toastmasters, it's called table topics, but you can just have a set of questions which you throw out at people and they have to answer on the spot. So, for example, I might say, okay, the question is, do you prefer cats or dogs? Jeffrey. And Jeffrey, you have to immediately start talking about whether you prefer cats or dogs. You don't have to tell the truth. You don't have to be serious.
Right.
You can really say whatever you want, even meandering off the topic. But in general, you want to stick roughly to the question. But it's extraordinary how just practicing that kind of exercise with there's no punishment if you do it wrong. There's no problem if you make a mistake or if you're less effective. You'll just learn from the experience. But it's incredibly liberating to just be able to do that sort of thing where the stakes are so low. You're amongst friends or supportive people. You just say what you want to say. Maybe you crack a few jokes and maybe those jokes don't land. Maybe they fall completely flat. Doesn't matter, does it? I mean, the stakes are so low, it doesn't matter. These people want you to succeed. Or sometimes you really knock it out of the park. Sometimes it's really successful and you'll give one answer and people will go, wow. And you, the speaker, will feel it, right? You don't need to be told, oh, Jeffrey, that was amazing what you just did. You will know from the way that people respond to you, oh, I did something right there. How can I recreate that? How can I do that again? Okay, so that's the impromptu speaking is one thing that I think is really valuable because it loosens you up and it teaches for people like me who are kind of naturally analytical and overly serious. It can be very freeing, liberating to just be able to say anything, just be completely ridiculous, just go off on a silly tangent. It's sort of you learn to play with the concepts and play with the words. And I find that very effective. You just have to keep practicing at it. And maybe the analogy, I believe you do some martial arts. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And I've also done a lot of martial arts over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I think that maybe from experience is it's really good to just be able to spar or roll with someone. Whether they're better than you or worse than you can just learn a lot from that experience. It's not a matter of just doing drills, rote learning punches or throws or grappling techniques. You need to try things out. And sometimes it goes well and you learn from that, and sometimes it goes really badly and you learn from that too. But the experience is very valuable especially when you're in a safe environment. So you're in a dojo or whatever you might call that space.
Mm-hmm.
It's safe. Everyone's looking out for one another. So yeah, that's the ideal environment in which to learn, I think.
Yeah, and it also allows you to be very playful. It's a very interesting balance to do
Exactly.
with.
Yes, you have to play.
Yeah. It's a very interesting balance to have with anything. If you're overly serious, you can bring the data across, but nobody's going to listen to you. You're going to disengage your audience pretty much.
I've heard a few of those speeches. I can tell you, working in finance, I've heard cases where people just want to hit the audience with numbers and facts and logic, And what you learn pretty quickly is that facts and logic actually don't win over an audience.
Right,
And
exactly.
that's jarring. I know there's some people who say, no, that can't be true. I've got to put in more facts. I've got to do more research. But it's not, it's simply not the case. Those things don't win over an audience. What wins over an audience is the kind of empathy that you can build from often stories. I think stories are the most effective way to win an audience over, but you've got to try and connect with them and with their point of view, which can be tricky, but it's something you can develop with practice. So that's something that people can learn over time in these regular meetings. It's really good if you can go every week or every fortnight and just practice the same sorts of things over and over again. Then there comes a point where you're very, very relaxed, very comfortable speaking. You're not too worried about the outcome, so you can just try different things. And you feel more of a connection with the audience such that you can really feel that you're speaking to them rather than I am reciting a speech and you happen to be in the room and happen to be hearing it. And those things feel very different. Even though you might say the same words, there's a very different feeling if you're connected with the audience versus if you're not.
A great series just came to mind, A Better Call Saul. Because that's exactly what he's doing when he's trying to win over the jury, right? He's not throwing facts at them. He's throwing a story at them. He's trying to empathetically connect with the jury and hang up this story. Like, how would you feel if you were in this situation where you were forced to do this? And yeah, bad thing might have happened, but hey, we were all young, right? So you know how it is. You know how young boys are. You know, something along those lines. He hangs up a story, and of course, this is fiction, obviously, but it does connect to what you're saying. It does connect to the idea that you're not trying to bring forward as many dry facts as possible, but you're trying to hang up a story because people can connect with stories. People can't connect with facts per se because facts might be interesting to you and valuable to you, but you have no idea what that jury might find valuable, right? But there's a pretty good assumption in there that you can assume that with a story, the chance of effectiveness, the chance of success is way higher.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a bit of an art which you can work on, which is developing the right kind of story. It doesn't mean just throw out any random anecdote which goes in any direction. No, I mean, of course, it has to be targeted and somewhat strategic. But yes, I've seen enough cases of in other people speaking, and sometimes when I get it right, where a good story can really win over an audience, where a whole list of facts and reasons wouldn't.
This is also to some degree it still is, but this used to be a very big problem for me as well, because I'm also, just like you, a very analytical person, right? So I will prepare my data sheets, I will bring those forward, and I don't have a finance background. In my case, it's an IT background. But you know just as well as I do, IT is very technical, so there's a lot of data-driven information in there.
Yeah, of course.
And if you bring that forward on like PowerPoint slides, with graphs and numbers and I don't know what else kind of data you can show, people are gonna check out. A very good example of that is if you want to enact a change in a process, for example, right, where a process is being changed for a team or for a company or something along those lines. You can think about you. This is also where change management comes in, but you can create a amazing process for how your team can operate, right? It can improve their capacity planning. It can improve their effectiveness. It can make it transparent for every single more transparent for every single stakeholder. Things along those lines. And it's all perfectly well, but if you're trying to get people with you, just laying out the process and saying, "Hey, this is how you have to work," that's not the way it's going to work. People are going to disconnect from it. And even specifically in this case, people will even get resistance to it, right? Because, right, who are you to tell me how to work? This is kind of a different story because this is specifically about change management. But it still connects to some degree, because if you manage to involve them in the story, right, and you lay out the vision why it is important, and what it can bring to the table, what value it can provide for them, right, and how it can make their lives better, and then also make them part of the solutions, and not just say like, hey, this is how you have to work right now, but also figure out like, hey, is this something that what are your thoughts on this? What do you think about this? Is it something that you feel you can connect with, or are there some things that you can do differently? Um, that helps a lot. That helps a lot. It's that empathetic connection to your audience, to make sure that whatever story you're trying to tell, whatever thing you're trying to do, it lands.
Yeah, I've seen so many examples of this, both what you've described working and also cases where people fail to do that and therefore they fail. But I think one thing to also just keep in mind is there are some people and some cases where people will hear what you've just said, what we've been talking about, and think, oh, okay. So the answer is that I need to pretend that I'm interested in them, pretend that I want to know what they think.
No.
But then I'll just twist it and throw it back at them and say, well, I've got the solution for you, and here's why this is exactly what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you from a lot of experience of seeing people try that, it really doesn't work. So there has to be something genuine, some genuine interest in connecting and in reaching the audience. And when people try to approach these situations too cynically and just basically make a sales pitch, but try to be really clever about it and make it seem like it was the audience's idea after all, but it it really doesn't work. It
Right.
can really be even more jarring because, of course, it presents as fake, and sometimes people won't even fully know why they find that approach so repulsive. They'll just know that they just in their gut they just think, oh, I don't trust this person. Oh, I don't want
Yeah.
to listen to this, and it's because it doesn't feel genuine.
I'm once again gonna use the same word here I'm having been using over and over again, but that's that word intent. Because the intent there is not to connect with people. The intent there is to sell them something.
Mm-hmm.
And people pick up on that because people are not stupid.
Mm.
You can see what someone's intent is. You can smell it, right? Everything about the person who is trying to sell you something, it tells you, it gives you the signal in the back of your mind, this person is just in it for themselves. They're just trying to tell you something. They don't give a crap about what you have to say, what you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this comes back to your comment earlier as well, that you have to strike that balance. So when you mentioned the more serious side of you, right? But that you have to let that go to some degree, and you have to be playful, and you have to crack some jokes here and there. What you're describing, I think, is that zone of playful exploration, of playfulness, of playing around. So this is nuanced. So tell me what you think about this, because it's not you can't just give people the advice, don't be too serious, just play around and prepare your information, but then improvise when the actual speech happens, because when people have proper social skills and proper communication skills, they might be able to pull that off very well, but you still have to train that. So once you have enough experience with the skill, once you mastered it, or once you are on a decent level with it, you can play with it, right? Because you understand the fundamentals, you can do something with that. But if you don't have that, you still have to build that. So then I can imagine that the level of preparation needs to be higher. You need to work more off script, I suppose, than do improvisation. But the better you become at communicating, the more improvisation you can do in your speaking. What do you think about that? Because this is really a question about the balance between how much do you improvise and how much do you prepare for your talk.
Let me just go back a little bit. I was chuckling as you were talking about that idea of, trying to get people to play, and it not being as simple as just saying don't be serious. I mean,
Right.
just think, I don't know if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, but I have certainly had people tell me, this is a long time ago, oh, Nick, you're so stiff and serious. Just loosen up, lighten up, man. Just relax. I don't think that advice has ever worked.
My eyebrows are super low and my voice is very deep. So
So that advice has never actually worked for anyone, because no one, when they're told, "Oh, you're so stiff and serious, you got to relax," no one actually relaxes when they're told that. It makes them go the other way and go, "Ugh." Okay.
exactly.
So it's
Hmm.
to get people to move in the right direction. I think it's a matter of just gradually making sure they feel comfortable and just gradually nudging them in the right direction of, well, you're amongst friends, just have a go at this. Just try something a little bit different. You'll see how it goes. And when they try and maybe they fail, maybe it's a complete flop, you can say, well, wasn't that worth trying? It wasn't the end of the world. That didn't quite go perfectly, but hey, it was actually pretty interesting. It turned out a little bit differently. It surprised us. We saw a different side to you. And so you can just gradually make people more comfortable
Hmm.
to experiment and to play. And then if we take that to a more sort of serious end point where, we've got some case where the stakes are actually high. I have to present to a group of clients, or in a setting where it's actually quite serious and it has to work. I think, well, I can tell you what works for me, which is to be extremely well prepared. So usually in those sort of situations where the stakes are high, I will probably know exactly what I want to say. I might even have a very clear plan or script somewhere. Is it in my pocket? Is it on my computer? In my bag? It'll be somewhere. There's something written down, but of course, I'm not standing there reading off a script.
Hmm.
So having that kind of framework that's set out is a really good fallback, like a safety net. And from there, knowing that there is a script, there is a kind of a system for this particular speech, then I can play with it. Then I can have a little bit of fun and, you know, diverge a little bit here or there, throw in a few jokes, maybe try and adapt to the situation. There'll be a lot of cases where if you're in the moment, then if you're, really properly present in the room, then there'll be opportunities just to throw out a joke, or, something's happened. I've had cases where, for example, something about the room itself just goes wrong. I had one case. Okay, so a speech contest I was in, very, this was like a fairly high stakes speech contest, and the lighting of this particular auditorium was just awful, such that there was one spotlight that was very, very bright on one spot of the stage, and then if you went anywhere else, you were suddenly completely in the dark.
Mm.
Okay. So that's incredibly uncomfortable when you've practiced that you want to move around the stage and you want to speak. And so you have some people who have rehearsed their movements around the stage, and this just causes trouble for them. But then you've got other people who can actually weave that into the speech. And you say, you sort of shuffle out of the light and you say, yeah, so I was in a very dark place at that moment. But then, step to the left, I saw the light. And so you can, if you are present, and of course that relies on being relaxed enough and comfortable with the audience or with that setting, then you can have fun with it. And I can tell you the payoff in those situations is
Yes.
massive, because generally
Hmm.
people want you to succeed. No one sitting in a auditorium listening to a speaker, no one wants them to be awful, really. No one wants, I mean, it's painful being listening to someone who's a poor speaker. So everyone wants the speaker to succeed. So if they, have a win like that and they can throw in a very appropriate joke here and there, you'll get a lot more. Maybe you get this extra credit. You get the normal, the standard expected laugh, which is, the joke is worth, and then you get some extra benefit, like an extra premium on that because of the situation, and people want you to win. They want you to be entertaining and comfortable and relaxed.
Hmm.
So yeah, that playing is not just effective as a strategy, it is also something that gets disproportionate rewards. And so it's always worth trying to do, but not completely forcing, just being open to that possibility.
Yeah, and that last word, that I think that's a beautiful one. Being open to possibility, because the moment that you enter that zone of playfulness, right, you pick up on these cues because you know you are aware enough to notice how your audience is reacting to you, and you are aware enough to see like, hey, wait a second, the lighting here is not good, so I can do something with that, right? Either I should just stay away from it and say, hey, there's a dark spot here on the auditorium, let's not go there because else I vanish for the audience, or you can crack a joke about it. That's beautiful. But the opposite end of the spectrum, and that's literally how we started this conversation, is that voice in your mind that just tells you, Nick, you're gonna mess this up. It's that anxiety that you bring forward. And the moment you are dealing with that anxiety, to me, that's my experience at least, anxiety causes mistakes in speech. And if you are very self-aware, those mistakes in your speech, you are like, man, I messed this up. This is not good, right? And there's some kind of sadness that flows over you, or some. It's not even. Yeah, it's some kind of depressiveness that flows over you. Like, man, I just don't got this. What am I doing here, right? And that's just a downward spiral into a speech that's completely blown. And maybe in the end, maybe there's still some things to salvage, but right in that moment where you're in there, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal.
Yeah. I've had a few moments like that. So yes, that's true. But with practice, you can also learn to recover.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
I have made valiant attempts to recover from the most horrible situations, like terribly awkward failures. And that's not to suggest that it always turned out to be successful, but it's better than just giving up and walking off stage, right? It's better than, yeah, well, it's always better not to just give in halfway through. So I've had, yeah, I mean, I can think of, okay, let me give you an example. When I said I joined Toastmasters, the one of the leading motivations to actually do it then was that I had met my now wife, and I was planning to propose to her.
Ooh.
So I was just getting ready, and because I'm an obsessive planner,
Mm-hmm.
I was already thinking ahead to our wedding and how I would have to make a speech as the groom at my own wedding. So before I
Mm-hmm.
proposed marriage, I was thinking, oh, wait, I'm not very confident making a speech, and I'll be at my own wedding, and I want to own that situation. I want to be the man at my wedding, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
joined a Toastmasters group then. That was the first experience. And so a lot of practice, a lot of preparation went into.
And this is how long ago?
So this was, let me see, 2012, and we got married in 2000. Oh, yes. So it would have been early 2012 then. And
Mm-hmm.
then,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, proposed later that year and then got married in 2013. But then, so fast forward a little bit, a lot of preparation, a lot of practice, whatever. I've written this absolute cracking wedding speech, brilliant wedding speech, hits all the right notes and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I get up on stage and I've of course, there's always some things that happen on the night. So some things were a little bit awkward, but I'm talking and it's all going well. And then I say one of the things I planned to say, which was quite kind of emotional, but also humorous. And that's another trick, which I can come back to. But I've said something and everyone laughs and I get a really big laugh, so big that I actually lose my train of thought. So it's so effective and so successful that I actually kind of stumble. And I'm going, oh, and then I paused, and then I thought, oh, and now I can't follow up with the next punchline because people have already laughed so much. And then I've paused. And so for just a brief moment in this high stakes situation, I stumbled. But then, as it turned out, I managed to recover because I said, oh, there was more to say, but you snooze, you lose. Let's move on. And I just carried on from there. And look, because I had everything very well prepared and I knew exactly what I wanted to say for the rest of the speech. So as soon as it was a mindset thing. For a brief moment, I was kind of out of the zone. And I can tell you in those situations, if you're in the wrong frame of mind, you can have a mental blank. You might have practiced a speech for weeks or months,
Yeah.
but suddenly that part of your brain is not active and you can just lose it. So it's just a matter of kind of jolting myself back sort of, resetting my mind to be back in the right, positive frame of mind. And then, oh, yeah, okay, I know exactly what I want to say. And just carry on as I did. Actually, can I
Right.
give just one practical, because some time ago
Yeah,
you were
yeah, yeah.
asking
Go
about
ahead.
practical tips, and I shied away from giving too many practical tips. But one thing I would strongly recommend, which is something that I think is a little bit unusual, most people wouldn't think of, is that if you need to present in a high stakes situation where you know you'll be feeling some pressure, it's really helpful to practice under pressure at some point. Not initially. Initially, you think about what you want to say, you practice in front of friends or a partner and, a supportive, sympathetic audience. But then after a while, try practicing under some stress. And I find the best case for doing that repeatedly is I will record a speech and then I will listen to it while I'm running. So I'm running around my suburb, I'm out of breath, my body is stressed, okay, my heart's beating fast, and I'm hearing this speech in my voice on loop over and over again. And then after a while, I start to speak it in sync with the recording. And then after a while, I turn off the recording
Hmm.
and I just recite it. So I'm running around talking to myself, and yes, I get some strange looks from people, but I can tell you this pays off so much, because then you get in a situation where you're under pressure, you're on a stage, lights on you, you got your microphone and so on, and you're a bit stressed, heart's beating, maybe you're breathing a bit faster than usual. But guess what? That is the physical state you were in when you were practicing the speech.
Mm.
So you don't lose the inspiration, you don't lose those words in that case. Whereas I think one problem that some people will have is they will practice in a very relaxed setting. They'll practice sitting on the couch with their partner or looking in a mirror. They're very relaxed. They're at home, in comfortable clothes. And then they'll go put on a suit, be under bright lights with a collar mic and so on in front of a big crowd of strangers, and be surprised that the words don't come to them, that everything they practice multiple times at home in comfort doesn't come to them in that stressful situation. So I think it's really important to prepare yourself for a little bit of stress and pressure so that when it comes, it's perfectly comfortable. You've been here so many times before, like you've sparred so many times with this particular person in your dojo, that when it's a contest, it's a tournament, and it's the final fight, it's the same person. You already wrestled with this guy, so you're just going to do that again. But hey, this time one of you will get a trophy if he wins.
Hmm.
So you can sort of reduce those stakes or reduce that pressure for yourself.
How do you maintain audience engagement?
There are a few aspects of what I do, and I think there are probably other things that other people do that work. But for me, a lot of thinking, a lot of preparation. I am still an obsessive planner and preparer. So I will think very carefully about who this audience is, what they're thinking. Okay, you might have a case where, if I think about it enough and maybe talk to a few people in that situation, I will know going in, all right, I know where this audience is mentally. They're not on board. They're skeptical of this. They think I'm an idiot, or they think I'm trying to sell them something that they already know they don't want. Well, that's really useful information, and you can prepare for that. So in that case, maybe I'll sort of test a few ideas. Maybe it's helpful to then start by saying, I'm really glad to be able to talk to you today. And I think the situation is this. You see me and you see this guy who wants to sell you something that you don't want, right? And if I'm right, I mean, of course, that can go horribly wrong if I'm wrong about that assumption. But it's the sort of thing that I would test out. I would make sure that I'm actually correct in those assumptions. And then you can at least get a little bit of a connection. Maybe you get a laugh, because if you've hit the mark and okay, these guys, they don't want to be there, they don't want to listen to this, they're sure they're going to disagree with me. Well, I've actually managed to get some early connection. And then I can say, well, maybe there is, something here which is we have a different view on. but there's probably also some areas that, there's actually some good common ground. You can sort of try and steer things towards what you might get their agreement on. That might be through stories, through humor, through something else. I mean, I'm not talking about it. It is simply challenging to go and pitch something which practically is just bad for the audience. Okay. But generally, that's a very rare situation, unless you're actually a salesperson, in which case you might face that situation more often. For me, it's not the case. It's a matter of just understanding the audience's interests and what their priorities are. And then this comes to not going overboard and emphasizing things which are not relevant to them. Okay, so of course, any audience will have particular priorities or interests or whatever they want to hear. Maybe they're just there, depends on the setting, but maybe they're just there to have a good time. Let's take the example of a wedding speech. Okay, I've been to a few weddings in my time. You probably have as well. And just think how many wedding speeches you've heard. I've heard so many, and some were amazing, and some were absolutely painful. Now think about that. It's not that hard to get inside the heads of the audience at a wedding. Okay, you don't need to do a lot of thinking about this. They're there for a good time. They love the bride and the groom, or they're there because it's an important occasion and they want the best for the couple. Okay, these are all sort of pretty obvious things that you can work off. But come back to the first one. They want to have a good time. So you don't bore them to death with a whole lot of anecdotes about things that happened, outside of their frame of reference, right? Very obscure. Oh, and the groom and I, we're out with the boys and we did this, and we're doing all this stupid stuff, and yeah, it was really funny at the time, but you had to be there. Yeah, you had to be there to find that funny. I mean, I've heard those sort of speeches which just go on and on and on. People just relating these anecdotes which no one can connect with. So that's a good case where, the brief is pretty simple. You've just got to entertain and please the audience, right? You kind of know where they're coming from. So with a little bit of thought, you can adapt what you have to say to what they want to hear. And that's a very sort of common case where some people just fail to do that. They have an idea that, for this wedding speech, what I have to do is big note my own part of the family. I heard one of these speeches once. This person came in from one side of the family, and the whole speech was basically about how our branch of the family is the best. We are so amazing, so prestigious, and basically you people are lucky to even be in the same room as us. Now you can imagine that didn't land, right? And actually, I remember some people walked out. Some people from the other side of the family got up and walked out of this speech because they were so offended, right? Now that's a pretty clear case of just misunderstanding the brief, right? I think if you put some thought into it and you have the right attitude, it's not that hard to structure what you say and approach the whole exercise in a way that can connect with the audience.
Yeah, this also connects a little bit to being able to explain complex ideas in a simple way. So let me make a little bit of a bridge here. What you're saying is know your audience, right? Yeah. Don't give anecdotes that nobody can connect to. Give a story that people understand, that people can do something with. They can visualize it. They've experienced it themselves. Those kind of things. It makes perfect sense. So that comes down to understand your audience. Understand what your audience wants to hear. Understand what they can hear. And also understand what they shouldn't hear. What's a little bit either above them or, just it's the context is not there. So if you're trying to lay out a complex idea in a simple way, which is something that we have to do all the time, not because the other is stupid, but because else there's infinite detail that we have to put in our explanation. Yeah. Then you can't answer a question from a 5-year-old child without speaking for an hour. So there has to be simplification involved. How do you simplify properly? How do you explain, because you, for example, your job, and we spoke a little bit about this outside of this podcast, is quite a complex job. There's quite a lot of stuff involved, quite a lot of data-driven information that you have to deal with and that you have to compress and that you have to express to whoever is listening to you at that moment.
Sure.
So there's a whole lot of converting of information going on there in real time, pretty much. How do you, in your personal experience, how do you deal with that?
Well, this is a very familiar challenge for me. Okay, I face this all the time in my work. I am trying to explain very complex, abstract concepts to a audience which has a range of understanding. Okay, so perhaps it would actually be easier if all of the people I was speaking to had a very basic understanding, but they don't. There's some people who are extremely sophisticated and understand all the concepts very well, and they don't want to be patronized. But then there's other people who have a very basic understanding and they need to be assisted to get a better grasp. And this will be in the same situation. There's just one presentation I'm doing and it's got to reach all those people. So I have a few ways of tackling this. One is to try and offer layers of explanation. So that means if I'm talking about a particular situation in the financial markets, it will mean laying out a few more technical concepts quickly, not getting too bogged down in those, but then saying, and really you could understand that a bit like this. And then I can talk about, give some sort of analogy or metaphor. Okay. So for example, recently this was a written piece, but the same principle applies. I was talking about a situation where, particular governments are having issues with the global bond markets. And already, there's some people who will hear that and go, oh, bond markets, I don't really understand how that works. And fair enough, because it's not relevant to them. But if you compare that to saying, okay, well, this is a bit like going to your bank to get an extension on your mortgage, to expand, borrow more money or take longer to pay back your mortgage. You want to make a good impression when you go into the bank. You don't want to go in there disheveled and hungover, right? You want to dress well, be, be sort of clear-headed and be able to present yourself well to be able to say, well, Mr. Banker, I would like to extend my loan or I'd like to borrow some money, and just make it clear that you're a credible person. So using that analogy, which is something that's a little bit more familiar to people, is helpful for those who don't understand, oh, this is a government whose treasury is trying to borrow money from the global bond market. That's a very kind of obscure situation. If you can try and make it a bit more relevant to them. So those sort of different layers of understanding, you can be technical, but then you can also offer a more simple, more familiar explanation or metaphor. I would also say it's important to just keep testing. I will often find when I'm writing or when I'm planning a presentation, I will just keep going back over what I'm planning to say and reading it very critically. I'm good at that. I'm good at self-criticism. So I can read what I've prepared and think, no, that's not clear enough. And I think what many people perhaps don't do enough of is doing that early work on themselves and their own writing or speech, and sort of forcing it to be more refined, forcing themselves to distill insights. There are some people who will think, oh, well, I understand this. I'm just going to throw it out there. And if these people don't understand, well, they must be idiots. Well, hey, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, but it doesn't matter. You're not going to win over the audience with that attitude. And if you throw out a whole lot of technical jargon, then you'll lose a lot of people, and they'll probably think you're the idiot because you can't explain something clearly at their level.
Right.
So instead, just sort of keep testing, just read it, read what you've prepared again and again, say, no, I can simplify that. Strip out those long words, change these, break down these long sentences into shorter chunks, make it all very easily digestible. And then, of course, you can get other people involved, so you can test it. So my wife works in a very different field. Okay, she's very smart, but she doesn't have the same area of technical knowledge. So I can present, do a little practice run to her and say, look, I'm trying to explain this very technical financial concept. Does this make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
And then I can get feedback from her. And sometimes the feedback will be, no, it still doesn't make sense. Do better. And that's fine. Then I'll go back and keep preparing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good one. I love to do that as well. If there's some complex thing that I have to lay out to employees, partners, whatever, throw it by my wife first. What do you think about this? Is this something that you would understand if you would read this or hear this?
And they don't hold back. That's the good thing about wives, right? Like they cushion the blow, right? Like if it doesn't make sense or if it's not clear, they'll tell you. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, they're brutally honest, and then you know that you have a good one. So absolutely, it does sound like there's and this is quite interesting to me actually, because it does sound like our approach is very different, and because tell me if I got this wrong. Still to this day, it seems like there's a lot of preparation in your work, right? So if you do a talk, or if you do a speech, or if you have to convince a group of something, you have your facts in order. You have your information ready. To the degree that you're running outside, listening to your own voice, right, and you can recite it to some degree, which makes you wield that speech, and then you can play around with it if it's needed. You know, with your light example as an example, but you still have that basic framework in mind that you can operate on. For me personally, so is anything in that summary wrong?
I would just say that. Let me just make clear that is kind of the ideal model of Nick's approach. And
Right.
lately, for example, if I'm presenting a very similar kind of content to a whole, several different audiences over a week or two, I don't need to rehearse and script everything for each one of those meetings. You know, maybe I'll think before the very first meeting, well, what do I want to say here? Maybe I'll do one sort of, running around the block with this just practicing what I want to say. But after that, it all just flows. So yeah, maybe lately, because I do this more often now in my work, it's sort of those muscles are well trained, I guess. So I don't need to go to that extreme of preparation, which I did do, for example, for my wedding speech. I mean, the amount of preparation that went into that was extreme, exactly like I described.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It also sounds like the audiences that we have is different. So I will, in my personal case, I will never stand in front of a group with a microphone in hand. So I will never talk to let's say 30 or more people at the same time. My public speaking, between quotation marks, is more limited. So in my case, it will be board meetings, or it would be meetings with managers across different countries at the same time, either digital or on location, or by addressing an entire team, for example, in order to make something happen for that team. Either we're making a project for them, or something along those lines. And to me personally, so for the meeting itself, I'm not preparing, if that makes sense. So I'm not preparing what I'm gonna say and my agendas. So if I send an agenda out, for example, for a workshop or something like that, I will be very limited in the amount of bullet points that I put in there. So people will know the broad subjects, but nothing that more than that. So I don't prepare for the meeting itself, but what I do try to do is I try to understand the story properly. So obviously in IT, when we're making products, and we have to talk about that product, I have to talk about that product. That means I have to understand that product properly, to the degree that I can ask, let's say, a couple of why questions in a row. Why is this product the product that you went for? And okay, if that product is the product that you went for, why are these features important in that product? And then the next level deep would be, why specifically Why specifically do you even use that feature? Why not something else? Why does your process work that way, right? So you need to have a deep understanding of the source material that you're talking about. Because the moment that you have that, in my personal case, if I have that deep understanding of the story I'm trying to tell and of the story of why that thing exists to begin with, then I don't have to be afraid that I can't answer questions. And still, even if that happens, right? Even if that, and this is also kind of this is I think more a leadership skill than a communication skill, but maybe it's both. Even if there comes a brilliant question forward, right? Somebody is listening very carefully to what you're saying, and he's like, "Hey, wait a second. You're telling me about this feature, and you're telling me about that project, and you want to implement it at that moment, but." At that moment, we are transitioning in such a way that that there's a thing that you have to take into account, which is that, something along those lines. And you're hearing that, and you're like, man, that is brilliant. Didn't think about that. That's brilliant, right? And now obviously you don't have an answer for that because you haven't thought about it. Mm-hmm. Fine, what's the problem? Perfectly fine. Thank him for that. Like, hey man, thanks a lot for that insight. I actually haven't thought about this. Let me get back to you about this. Sure. I'll figure it out. Perfectly fine. I'll send it in the meeting notes, or I'll send it later in an email. Depending on how long you need to figure it out. Mm. But thanks, awesome. Really appreciate that insight, and also really cool that you're paying that much attention. It's really cool to see. Let me get back to you. I'll let you know how to move on from this. So then you don't have an answer. You have no idea what this is about. But no harm. It's perfectly fine.
Well, I think that's a really good way to respond. Not everyone responds that way. In that situation, there are some people who would try to blag their answer, right? Just try and wing it. And of course, it's almost certain that then it'll be obvious, right? That you're lying and pretending to know something. I would just ask though, in your case, then you talk about those being familiar with the stories.
Yes.
Are they familiar stories? Like, I don't know exactly about your work, but do you, for example, have, a few particular products or programs or systems, and once you know those few, it's a matter of matching that particular story to whatever this particular client needs? Or are they all different stories? Every single client, I mean, I know every client is going to be somewhat different, but I mean, do you have cases where you are going into a situation where it is completely different to everything you've ever dealt with before?
Yeah.
And you're still quite relaxed about, I'm just going to, be comfortable with my story, but just see how this goes, right? I mean, that's the sort of situation for me where I would be preparing somewhat obsessively when it's a case of, well, I really don't know, this is completely new territory for me.
Yeah, so it would depend on the context. But if I talk about a story, what I mean is not a story which is living in isolation in a bubble. Mm-hmm. So it's not an isolated thing. When I'm talking about a story, I'm meaning more like a landscape, right? And some parts of this landscape has been explored, but some parts hasn't. So if part of the landscape becomes relevant, which in this case might be a piece of software for an organization, I need to make sure that I understand the software properly. I also need to make sure that I understand the team properly. So I need to make sure that I understand what the dynamics are between those two different things, right? How are they going to work together? I need to understand what their, and there in this case will be the team, what their challenges are, because I don't want to solve an issue that doesn't exist. That doesn't make any sense, right? So I need to make absolutely sure that whatever I'm bringing forward to the table is not valuable in my mind. Obviously, it also needs to be valuable in my mind, because else what's the point of the project? But it needs to be valuable for them, right? It needs to provide something for them. And I need to understand that need. I need to understand those requirements, and I need to understand on a deep level what that piece of software will do for them. Because then I can give anecdotes about, hey, what is the last time that you opened your Outlook and you saw 10,000 mails open in your Outlook and you had no idea how to prioritize those mails, and where to start first, which takes you 2 hours to get even up to speed, which is lost time on that day, and now you have 6 hours left, and now there's even more work because another 1,000 emails came in. Have you ever been in that situation? And when I know for a fact that has been a situation, then I know that a piece of organization software that I will bring forward that is easy to understand and easy to explain, for example, is something that will very likely match their needs and will trigger questions from their side. And those questions I can only answer if I understand that piece of software. But in the case, because once again, I'm talking about not a story in a bubble, I'm talking about the landscape. So in the situation where someone in the audience is pointing their flashlight onto a certain piece of the landscape that I haven't properly explored yet, I'm like, man, I'm looking at it now, and maybe I can infer from context what the answer is, but then I will have to give the disclaimer like, hey, this is an assumption that you're about to hear, but I think based on the rest of the landscape that this is very likely going to be, what that is over there. But if I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, I really don't know. Hey, thanks for the insight. Brilliant question. Let me get back to you. So that's that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. I would like to know. Well, I'm interested to hear this because I find this kind of situation in this process fascinating. Right. So I have my own way of doing it, but I like to hear how other people handle those sort of things. Do you ever have a situation where I'm wary of starting to interview you, but do you ever have a situation where you have an audience who are just very hostile? They have really decided before you turn up, we do not want what this guy is selling. We just don't want it.
Yes.
And you have to kind of come up against that wall. Is that something that's happened to you before? And
100%.
How do you handle that? Because that's one that I still have struggles with occasionally.
Yeah, 100%. So this is where you get into the personalities that you're interacting with, and I think you have to understand that that people are very, very complex because there's different interests, there's different personalities, there's different needs, there's all these different layers of people that will either motivate them to be sympathetic to you or to be not. And there's a couple of things you can do, I think. And this is where we delve into the concept of, in my mind, what happens right now when we discuss this is, in my mind, the word negotiation gets triggered. Leadership and negotiation gets triggered. This goes, in my personal opinion, further than just communication skills. Because you are dealing with someone who is not sympathetic to what you're trying to do for them or for whatever. Why? Why is that? If you have no idea, there's nothing for you to work with. And if you have a person that is resistant towards you and you don't understand why that is the case, and you're trying to make your argument even stronger, you just end up frustrating the other person.
Yeah,
right?
Because
that. you're not having any empathy. You're not connecting with the person. You're not taking any effort to understand what their position is. So in my personal situation, I would always ask questions, and I will do it in a way. I will make statements and ask questions in a way that is not attacking, that is not offensive, but that is just laying it on the table, just being transparent, and see what happens then. And I've talked about this in a couple of earlier podcasts as well. I'm a very big fan of Chris Voss from the Black Swan Group. He is a ex-FBI negotiator, and I, in my personal opinion, a couple of his techniques are absolutely brilliant, and over the last 8 to 9 years have helped me enormously with exactly this thing. So, understanding someone. It seems like something is holding you back from engaging in this product, or it seems like something is bothering you that right now is not on the table, but that maybe that I can help with. Or it sounds like something is stopping you, right? It sounds like something is preventing you from moving forward with this. Those kind of questions. Those are questions that are not accusatory, because I'm not saying, dude, why are you not engaging? Right? Hey, you see, or even projecting their assumed intention. Why are you not interested? You have no idea if they're interested or not, right? So why would you say something like that, right? So those kind of statements, why are you not interested? Not good.
Yeah,
In my personal opinion, never good.
agree.
But what you can say is, it seems like something is stopping you.
And they can say no. They can say, no, 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 that's wrong. Like, because it's gentle enough. I think that's important to approach those things in a sort of very delicate way.
Hmm.
So you don't have a clash. Whereas, as you say, if you ask them, why are you not interested? Well, that's war. And they say, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, that just shuts down the whole conversation. Right.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, you can tease out a lot with those delicate questions. I'm chuckling because as as we were talking, I was looking up the name of Chris Voss specifically, right? Because I was thinking, oh, that guy, the Black Swan Group guy, like I know, I know exactly, I know his catchphrases, I know his strategies. Voss, yeah, Voss. I
Mm,
couldn't remember his first name, but yeah, I'm a big fan too. He's yeah,
yeah.
he's got some really good insights.
I think I've read his book, Never Split the Difference, probably 7 or 8 times by this point, and
Hmm.
every single time before I have a big negotiation, so a very big event that is about to happen,
Yeah.
um, every single time I read that book again, back to front. It's a brilliant book that I can recommend to everybody listening because it's not about communication,
Mm.
it's not about leadership, it's not even about negotiation to some degree. What it is about is connecting with other people and understanding them. And then when you have that understanding, when that connection is there, then you can collaborate together to reach whatever goal you want to reach,
Hmm.
which is an absolutely beautiful thing because literally it really doesn't matter if right now you and I, Nick, we are talking to each other and we are using those techniques to connect with each other better, which from my personal perspective I am, because I think it's a very good way to not just draw more information out of you, but to really connect with you and to really understand you. So it's the information pipeline is maximally open, but it's also very pleasant for people. It's very
Yes.
good to be heard. It's very good to be understood. Nobody likes not to be understood.
Well, people want to be listened to, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think some people misunderstand this, even if they hear Chris Voss speak, and their takeaway might be, oh, so this guy's like a hostage negotiator, right? And his strategy is all about winning. Like this is how he gets these people to do what he wants. So I've got to think in that mindset. And actually, to me, no, the 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 focus is on no, trying to connect with these people, trying to understand where they're coming from,
Right.
even with in his case, in those some of those negotiations, these are really despicable people, right? So it's actually very hard to connect
Yes.
with those people, but to be effective, to get the outcome you want, you actually need to be. And then those strategies are widely applicable. It can apply between friends, between business colleagues, in a job interview, in a client pitch, all of these different situations on a date. It can be very, the same sort of skills of just trying to connect and reach the other person are always very valuable.
Yeah. 100%. Let me ask you the same question, Nick.
So,
So when you were dealing with personalities who give you resistance,
mm,
how because you mentioned that you were struggling with this. Well, not maybe struggling with this, but this is something that you're dealing with currently.
yeah,
How do you
sometimes
currently deal with it, and how would you like to deal with it?
it's still a challenge, honestly. It's not a situation I find that is easy to handle. But my best approach to that is, excuse me, beyond what you've already said, like trying to kind of tease out
Hmm.
what the issue is. It sounds like this isn't quite working, or this is uh, there is resistance, or there's some sort of concern. Just trying to tease out those issues, but also just backing. My approach would be to just sort of back off. Some people will double down. They'll say, "Oh, you think you don't want this? Let me tell you why you really want this." And they'll even
Mm.
go harder into sort of sales pitch mode. Not me. I would sort of
Hmm.
step back and be a little bit more kind of gentle, rueful about the situation, and just try and sort of work around. It seems like in that situation, it feels like to me, it feels like you've just sort of clashed like this. It feels like this person, they thought you were coming this way, they set themselves up this way, they've clashed, they're resisting you. So it's sort of helpful to try and just work around, like see if there's a different angle whereby not that you can not that you can conquer, not that you can win, but that you can better understand, because you don't get understanding from this. All you get from that is, oh, there's a blockage, there's a disagreement. That's not very helpful in
Yeah.
the scheme of things. Whereas if you can sort of work around whatever blockage or disagreement there is, you can understand their situation and maybe find common ground. Not always. Sometimes it's simply that, I'm thinking in the case of, in investment products, there are cases where this person just does not want anything in the realm of what is on offer. And that's just what it is. So in that case, it's worth understanding that so you don't, you know, you don't frustrate the situation further.
Hmm.
But in many cases, if you just try and explore delicately around that initial disagreement, you can find some common ground. You might sort of open up other opportunities. You might sort of find, okay, well, they really do not have any interest in what I was actually briefed to talk about, but maybe they'd be open to something else. Maybe it's actually something else that they need, which happens to be something I know quite a lot about anyway. It's off the topic I plan to address today, but maybe this is, a conversation for another time. There can be ways around. And that, I think that applies outside of my work as well. Sometimes in social situations you'll find, you know, you just butt heads with people until you find a different way to engage with them. Different people have different ways of communication which they're receptive to. So it's just being able
Hmm.
to explore, play a little with the situation and find something that works.
Right. Yeah. And I think, tell me what you think about this.
Hmm.
It seems like a lot of the time when people are being met with resistance when they are speaking, they take it personally,
Mm.
right? They take it as a personal failure or as a personal attack, or they take it personally. And that's, now you're getting attacked. So the blood pressure is going up, the heart starts beating faster, you maybe sweat a little bit, and now you have to defend yourself, right? Because now you're getting attacked,
Mm.
which brings a couple of things forward, generally, that I think aren't good. You become more combative. So this was for me a very big one. So I'm curious what you think about this. I used to have the issue that when I was talking with people and I didn't react absolutely enthusiastic
Hmm.
and not even that extreme. They did, let's say they kept neutral. I took that very seriously, or very, very personally. They must not find me interesting enough. They must not find the product interesting enough. They might want me to fail, or those are extreme examples. But those kind of thoughts then bounce around the mind. Instead, okay. So before I go to the instead, what do you recognize this issue?
Mm.
And if you do recognize it, how do you prevent yourself from taking things personally in meetings when you're met with resistance, or when you're met with passiveness, or when you're met with someone on their phone,
Hmm.
anything along those lines?
This is a hard one. This is something I have a lot of experience in, and it's difficult, and there are different strategies. Now, I know some people whose strategy, if you can call it that, is
Hmm.
to basically have a very deep rooted assumption or certainty that everyone else is an idiot and that anyone who disagrees, it's because they're an idiot. Now, I said that's that's some people I know who have that approach. And hey, ultimately, sometimes maybe that can have a good outcome. I don't think it's a good approach. My approach is more to just have confidence in myself. This has taken a while to develop, but now I have a really solid sense of self-worth that I am valuable. And so if someone seems to be not appreciating what I have to offer, whether that, I think you were suggesting it might be like in a work context where they're rejecting whatever I'm talking about, but I might take it personally. But I can tell you, I've had situations where it is actually obviously quite personal, like it is actually directed at me personally.
Hmm.
And even then, I've learned to just try and deflect it, just sort of be water, let it go through you. Because even if things can sound like they're personal, it's possible that the impetus is not. And let me explain that, because that sounds a bit strange. But what I mean is, I have been in situations where someone will say something that is directly personally offensive or hurtful. But after sort of moving through that situation, it becomes clear that actually the issue is with this person who said that. They are having, troubles in their personal life, or they're having something else going on in the background, or they have, issues with another person
Right.
in their life, and they're transferring those issues onto me, or they've got you know, some issue within themselves and they're projecting that onto me. And so it seems very personal, directed towards me, and it isn't. And the point is not to immediately assume, oh, it must be this person's problem, but rather just think, it doesn't need to affect me. It doesn't need to wound me. I think actually this is a thing with our culture these days. People are so easily offended. They so easily take things um, to an emotional level and get um, you know, put emotional heat into these sort of interactions when they don't, it doesn't need to be there. So I've become much better at just letting these things be deflected, and maybe it's a situation where, I just need to just not react to the situation. And then after the meeting, after whatever that interaction was, go for a walk, clear my head, think about it,
Hmm.
and I will then realize, properly digest the situation and realize, yeah, in the scheme of things, this doesn't really matter. But I've had plenty of situations where, yeah, there is some kind of hostility, and I've just learned not to give it too much emphasis
Hmm.
in my own head. Just don't let it bother you.
Yeah, exactly. This is interesting. When you're talking about deflection, what do you mean exactly? Is it ignoring? Is it brushing aside? Is it addressing? What is in your mind deflection?
Let me use a martial arts analogy.
Hmm.
There are cases where if someone is trying to strike you, it might be, of course, the ideal is to not be there, to be out of the way, to move out of the way, right? But there will be situations where that's actually impossible. The attack comes so fast, so quick, so well targeted that it's actually very hard to not be there at all. But there are parts of your body which are much more vulnerable, and there are parts which are not. So there'll be situations where you need to, you know, block. I mean, I'm thinking I did practiced a martial art which was developed from karate, so it's more of a striking art than a wrestling art.
Hmm.
But there'll be cases where the defense is to block something and move out of the way, and so it's the combination of, yeah, just minimizing the damage, I guess. The ideal is that you don't get touched. You're completely in a different space, but that might not be realistic. So instead, you just need to sort of minimize the damage to yourself, and then in an emotional sense, when you're having those sort of interactions, that's kind of how I see it. That you're just not letting it not letting it strike any part of you that is actually important,
Hmm.
and therefore protecting those core parts of your identity. And that's a skill to be developed over time. I think there are people who go the other way. There are people who will manage to find personal offense and personal hurt in anything at all. The most innocuous kind of comments or interactions. And obviously that's not good.
Yeah.
That's a real problem for society. But no, I just try and minimize the impact on me.
Yeah, fair enough. I, w- I would use the so going back to those going back to Chris Voss and those techniques from Never Split the Difference.
Hmm.
For me personally, it's a combination of a couple of things. Because this used to be a very big problem for me, for myself, that I used to take things very personal. If I,
Hmm.
if I was met with resistance or neutrality or passiveness or anything like that. Right now, so back then, I think I used to point it out, like more very bluntly, right? Because the
Hmm.
Dutch generally are very bluntly, and I'm very Dutch, I was very blunt. So I will say something along the lines of, hey, is something I'm saying here boring you?
Mm.
Something along those lines. Right now, it makes me more interested, I think. So I don't take it personally anymore, because by using, it feels like, it sounds like, it seems like, those kind of statements, but also asking open-ended questions.
Hmm.
And there's a couple of other techniques that allows me to focus on the technicalities of the conversation, of the interaction, instead of focus on the emotional load of it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So I pretty much put my technical hat on, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's disengagement here for a very technical reason. The source of that reason is unknown, and the source of that reason can only be found out by asking questions. Hey, it seems like something important is going on right now. Do you need some time? Something along those lines. That provokes an answer. That provokes, interactivity between us. And then we'll go from there. So this is very, very context heavy. So it's not like, hey, you have to ask this and you have to ask that in this specific order, and then you'll be good. That doesn't work like that. It's very context dependent. But by focusing on the technicalities of the conversation, and by being actively interested in the other person's position, that prevents me from focusing on myself. And this is kind of the advice also, I suppose. This kind of is a parallel. I'm not really sure who said it, but it's something along the lines of, if you are in a bar and you are very self-conscious, and you're constantly thinking to yourself, what is the best way for me to speak to the, I don't know, the girl next to me or the lady next to me or whatever. Because you are very self-conscious, it prevents you from interacting with the other person, because all you are doing is thinking about yourself in your own mind and your own thoughts. So but the opposite of it is, you can't just tell and give people the advice, just stop thinking about yourself, right? It's like saying, Nick, stop thinking about a pink elephant with a golden hat on that has a bird on his shoulder. It doesn't work. Our minds are programmed to focus our direction there. So find something to distract yourself with. And that something to distract yourself with is focus on the other person, right? Focus on them. Be hyper interested in them. And that prevents you from thinking about yourself. And this is kind of the same thing. By asking questions and by focusing on the other person's position, it doesn't matter if their personality type doesn't matter, whether they are analytical, whether they are super dominant, whether they are very passive, whether they are accommodating kind of people. It doesn't matter who they are.
Mm.
By focusing on them, I prevent myself from taking it personally, but I also seek out at the same time the source of that behavior, or not even that behavior, but the effect of that behavior. And then when that is out in the open, and then when we can have an open conversation about that, we'll figure it out. If the answer is, sorry, my daughter was just in an accident, I need some time right now to coordinate. Hey, man, you don't have to explain it further. Totally fine. Take all the time that you need. I understand that, obviously. I understand that my speech about whatever project this company is doing right now is not gonna trump whatever you are having going on with your daughter right now. That makes perfect sense. But if I don't know that, and I assume like, hey, what I'm saying is not interesting, yeah, that's not good. Even worse, I'm gonna bring accusations forward, like, hey, dude, why are you not paying attention? Why are you so late?
Well,
When he has that stuff with his daughter going on, right? That is, if you ever want to lose respect from people permanently, that is a perfect way to do it.
Well, I think also I can say outside the Netherlands, that phrase,
Mm.
is something I'm saying boring you or whatever, that comes across as very aggressive
Yeah.
to me, right? So if
Mhm.
someone said that to me, like that conversation is over. Maybe I was getting bored, but still, that breaks the potential relationship there. I think you've got to be really careful not to infer too much from a very limited interaction. Okay, I mean, a key part of my job, I would say, as an analytical role is to join the dots. You get certain pieces of information and you have to join them together. But there is always the risk
Mhm.
that, you get three dots and you join that into an elephant, right? Or, three dots might look like a triangle, but actually it's a circle. The shape is a circle, and you just have those 3 points on a circle, right? So you can easily make the wrong inferences from a limited situation. So I would have, in cases where I find a particular interaction really just isn't working,
Yeah.
I'm probably more likely to try and disengage or deflect a little, and then try and have another go some other time. If it's someone new person in my office, and our first interaction is just really awkward, I'm not going to write them off straight away. I'll come back, some later
Mhm.
time and try and have
Mhm.
another interaction. And sometimes there'll be a case where, okay, 5 or 6 times I've tried to engage with this person, and every time it comes off a certain way. Well, then maybe that's a case where I would
Mhm.
then be trying to tease out what might be the issue. But I think also that trying to change the frame
Yeah.
is also important. So it's not like you just, coming up against someone hard. You can sort of, I mean, I've had cases where trying to interact in a certain, trying to engage with someone in a certain way, and it's really not working. It can be helpful to effectively, you've got one person here, to effectively kind of step to the side, and like an observer, and say, oh, wow, this really isn't working, is it? I mean, I've honestly, before I met my wife,
Mhm.
I in when I was dating, I had some good dates and I had some terrible dates. And there were some dates where the only thing to do was effectively to step to the side and go, God, this really isn't working, is it? Like, actually, and say that aloud. Say, yeah, this really isn't a good match, is it? And there's still some goodwill there. It's like, I still wish you well. It's just you're clearly not a good match for me. Also,
Yeah.
with your story about in the bar trying to talk to people and feeling anxious and too focused on yourself, I had a case because I was that kind of person socially, and I had a mentor at Toastmasters who said to me one time, he took me aside and he said, Nick, I've noticed, you're kind of a bit socially awkward, like you're a bit uncomfortable. When we have our tea break, you're not really sure, who to talk to or what to say. And let me give you a piece of advice. This is this guy Richard, my mentor, and he said, listen, here's the secret you need to know for these sort of social interactions. People love talking about themselves. Okay, anyone will feel more relaxed and more comfortable when they are talking about themselves. And you can apply that in this sort of social situation. And I do. When you go into this kind of situation, you walk into a room where you don't know anyone and you want to strike up a conversation. I'm in that situation. I'm feeling a little bit anxious, but all I do is go and introduce myself to someone, and then I just start talking about myself. And I can talk about myself for hours. Now, some people don't want to hear that. They don't want to listen. But I know I'm going to be very relaxed. I know that at least 50% of the people in the conversation are having a good time. And so that's the key. That's what I do to handle these situations, Nick. And you should try it too. It's a very effective strategy. Now, I heard that. I listened to it. I didn't actually take notes, but I thought about it and I said, thank you very much, Richard. And it was only several days later that I realized he was actually joking, right? It took that long because I was so serious and so sort of in my own head that it took me that long to digest it and realize, oh, okay. So this guy was actually making a joke. But what I find now is whenever I'm in that situation, feeling a little, if I'm feeling, anxious or not sure what to say, I just remember that story and it makes me smile and chuckle. And then immediately I'm in a much better frame of mind to actually be able to have a proper conversation where I actually, share things about myself and ask things about the other person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually good, as it was actually effective as a frame changer to sort of break that first frame of, oh, this is awkward, oh, I'm nervous, I'm not sure what to say, break it into, oh, this is a bit silly, isn't it? Everyone's a bit awkward, but we'll muddle through. I'm sure it'll just be fine. And then you can progress. Yeah. Once you see the situation differently.
Beautiful. Nick, is there anything that we didn't discuss today that we should have talked about?
There are so many other things to be said on another occasion. I'm not sure. Perhaps one thing I would like to throw in, which is that we have said so much about communication and the benefits for engaging with other people in different contexts, socially, work, romance, whatever. Yes, it's very important in those situations with other people to connect with other people. But I think there's another aspect to good communication, which is for personal development and growth. At least for myself, I think best through communicating. So I will find that when I am trying to explain a concept to other people, or when I'm trying to make an argument, at the moment, I'm really enjoying writing some essays on different issues in politics and culture and society. I'm making myself write out an argument and backing up my points with examples and trying to explain it to, I imagine, a critical reader. And I find that actually helps me think. So I'm actually getting new inspiration and new ideas and a better understanding through that communication discipline. So the point is, working on your communication skills is not just good for your relationships with other people, it's also good for your relationship with yourself. It can help you kind of round out your own identity and be a sort of a more real and well-established person, to really know what you think and why, and understand where there might be gaps in your thinking. And yeah, just sort of, and that's building confidence, right? That's helping you go through the world knowing, yeah, I think this and this is why, and I've really thought this through because I have pushed myself to be able to communicate that clearly. I think that's just something else that people need to appreciate about communication.
Wonderful. Nick, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your insights. You're a great dude. Always a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Really appreciate it.
Take care of yourself.